Hey guys, welcome to Vintage Wanderlust. My name is Kat, and today we're going to be talking about 5 benefits of wearing vintage clothing. I've been wearing vintage clothing for, I want to say, the past 6 or 7 years, and I don't wear it every day, but I do wear it pretty often, and I can actually wear it to my job, so this actually helps in the amount of time that I'm able to wear it. So I think that I know my way around a vintage wardrobe, at least for myself. So I'm going to tell you about the 5 things that I learned are real benefits of wearing vintage clothing right now. To begin with, vintage clothing is unique. No one you know is probably going to have your piece. Especially the older your piece is, like the less often you're going to run into people that have something even remotely similar to it, or even in the same cut. And this often means that you're going to get so many compliments. I know that when I go out and I'm wearing a nice hat, or if I'm wearing a nice linen dress and some shoes, or even some white kidskin gloves, or black or blue or green or whatever color gloves, people always look at me and they give me compliments. Now, not everybody really wants attention on them all the time, but I've never really gotten anything other than compliments. No one ever tells me I look bad. No one's ever made a negative comment towards the way that I dress. The next aspect of wearing vintage clothing that makes it a positive is that vintage clothing is made well. It's made to last. The materials usually tend to be a better quality, and those better quality materials are actually going to last a lot longer. And the seams are also stronger than a lot of seams used in a lot of modern day fashion, depending on the price range that you would normally buy from. Most people aren't really buying exclusively designer fashion brands, and even designer fashion brands are starting to cut corners in different places without really alerting the consumer. So another thing is that this better quality that you see from vintage garments means that it's going to last longer. So you can invest in a piece of clothing knowing that you can get years of use out of it. So like this dress, for example, I've had this dress and I've loved this bright colored linen dress for years. I want to say I've had this thing for, this is probably one of my first vintage buys when I was really young, so I think I've had this for 10 years, maybe a little bit more. And that means that the quality is there. This thing doesn't look worn in or anything at all. So it's actually something that's a great positive for this sort of fashion. So I hope that this is something you take into consideration when you're going out to buy your first vintage piece. Look for quality, and you're going to be happy with what you get, and it's going to last you a long time. Now, the next thing that I should let you guys know is that vintage clothing can be really, really cheap, and it can also be really, really expensive. Now, the expensive part is not to scare you away. When you guys go on Etsy and you're going to see $300, $500, $2,000 dresses from the 1920s, now, most of us can't afford those things. I know I can't afford those things. And it's better to know that on sites like Etsy and on sites like eBay, where I know that I get the majority of my vintage clothing, you can search according to your price range. So you don't even see and aren't tempted by dresses or outfits or accessories that you can't afford. So this is something that's really great because you're not tempted, and you get to look at the steals. Some people are just giving away this clothing. Like this cute dress right here, I think I bought this for about $30, maybe less. And the best part about this is that in almost any vintage setting, whether it be online or at an antique store or a vintage clothing store, you can always negotiate prices. Just contact the seller privately and say, hey, would you be willing to negotiate on your price? Always make sure to be polite, because they can decline depending on if they consider the piece to be appropriately priced or not. But usually they'll knock it down at least 10%, sometimes more. I've gotten pieces knocked down 50%, 60%, and there are great sales online at vintage clothing stores on Etsy, and people lower their prices on eBay too, so it's great to comparison shop, because sometimes a store on Etsy will have another store on eBay, and the store on eBay might have prices a little bit lower than the Etsy shop, and vice versa. And the great other thing about it is that vintage clothing can actually also be free. Now, this depends on who you are and who you know, because almost everything in life depends on that. But if you know a lot of older people, sometimes older people are looking to get rid of their vintage clothing because they don't wear it anymore. Either it doesn't fit them or it's been in the closet forever, and they're just looking to find somebody that appreciates it, and that's why they've held on to it for so long. So if you know somebody, maybe make it known that you're interested in starting a vintage wardrobe. Maybe you'll get something out of it, maybe you won't, but it never hurts to bring up something that you're interested in and know that perhaps somebody can get great joy out of seeing you wearing something that they wore when they were in their teens, 20s, 30s, or even 40s. The fourth benefit of wearing vintage clothing is that vintage clothing is environmentally friendly. So there is almost no carbon footprint associated with it, considering most of what goes into it is just you getting the package sent to you if you're ordering online. And using shops like Etsy, they've gone carbon neutral and they are actually combating their carbon usage whenever you make a purchase off of Etsy. So that's great. Or you're driving your car to a vintage shop or an antique store. But the garment itself, it's been made. Whether it's made out of fur, whether it's made out of leather, whether it's made out of cotton, or whatever it's made out of, silk, that item is already there. It's not gonna just disappear. It's there. And so to have people reusing it after someone's already gotten rid of it or sold it, that's something that's a positive thing, because otherwise that item would be sitting in a landfill, just like the rest of the fast fashion pieces in the world. However, the difference with this is that most people agree that vintage clothing has some value behind it, so most of the garments don't end up there. But what's the difference between having a garment laying in a landfill and having it hang on a rack or in someone's closet for the next 50 years? You know, it's not something that's worthwhile that way. It's better to wear it, and so basically you're recycling this clothing and saving it from not being used. The next part is that by buying vintage clothing that's already been manufactured years ago, you are not supporting fast fashion brands. So supporting the latest trends may be all well and good, but you know, it's not always the healthiest thing for the environment, considering a lot of materials are used to manufacture things nowadays. A lot of plastics are used in clothing nowadays. People tend to wonder why people dressed so conservatively back in the day, and one of those reasons is due to the fact that they could end up wearing a long sleeve dress in the summer if they wanted to, considering those dresses were usually made out of linen or light cottons. Unlike today where our shirts look nice and light, but if they're made out of polyester, they're gonna keep all that sweat insulated, and nobody likes that. Another aspect of this is that fast fashion also leads to uses of slave labor and unfair wage pay, and sometimes working in horrific conditions. And by not buying fast fashion products, you are not supporting these endeavors. And the next part about this is that fast fashion is usually, like I said, made out of things that are plastic, and vintage clothing, for the most part, and the older clothing that you go, the more true this is most of the times, is that vintage clothing is usually made out of natural fibers. Not always, but usually. And that means that when you wash these fabrics, if they are in good enough condition to be washed in the washing machine, you are not going to be releasing microplastics into your freshwater stream. Now, a lot of you may not know what microplastics are, but every single time that you throw a garment into the washing machine, it releases microscopic particles, no matter what material it is. And so for things like polyester, spandex, any material, you name it, any of those plastics, they're releasing microscopic pieces of that material into the water stream. So it's really just a great way to live, because you're helping the environment out by doing something that you love. My final point is going to be that your vintage pieces, if you accumulate enough of them, or heck, even if you just decide to become a seller, people become sellers sometimes because they realize these clothing items have resale value. Now, resale value is absolutely phenomenal. You could decide that after a few years, you're not really feeling a piece, or maybe somebody decides to give you their entire vintage wardrobe because you are a lucky soul, but you may not want to wear like 40 different sweaters or even 10 different sweaters, and they might not fit you all the same way. Well, your clothing actually has resale value. You can actually go online and sell your clothing. Most fast fashion pieces don't have great resale value. People often list them on places like Depop and Mercari and eBay, and they may get like 10, 12, maybe even $30 for a piece. But I mean, it takes a lot of time to make a listing, and the return is usually not worth it when you could actually just write those pieces off on your, if you have an itemized tax list, you can just write those pieces off and make them as a charitable donation. Just make sure you get a receipt if you're going to do that when you go to donate your clothes. But it's a lot better to have resale value in your clothing, because after a while you may just get bored. So with this, you can go sell your clothing online, which takes some time but will get you a bit more money. Or you can go to different vintage clothing shops. If you have any in your area, a lot of them are in need of buying stock. And if you have plus size clothing, that's even better, because a lot of people are looking for plus size vintage clothing. So, but honestly, they're looking for any size vintage clothing, because again, vintage clothing pieces are unique. So when someone sees something that they really like, they're gonna buy it now, because if they don't buy it then someone else will, and they're never going to see that piece again. So the moral of the story is, this is a great practice because it means that you have the option of making some money back from your purchases. That means that you're not constantly spending, only spending money on your purchases, and you're not killing the environment, because you are also reinvesting into that recycling system of having people wear these clothing items over and over again. And they can do so for a long time because, again, those clothing items are durable and they're made well, they're made to last, and they're unique, so people want them. They have great value. So I'm glad that you joined me here for this little talk, and I really hope that this video gave you something to look forward to if you're in the market for your next vintage piece, or even your first vintage piece. And if you guys have any questions about anything that I've mentioned in this video, or if you just want to talk fast fashion versus vintage fashion, or want to talk about anything at all, feel free to drop a comment. And if you wouldn't mind liking this video, I know it's going to do great things for the YouTube algorithm and help me get my channel up and running. And with that, I hope you guys have a nice day. Bye.